Ready or we doing? Okay, great. All right, everyone. It's great to be here at our final session of our first ever Just Transition Summit, our first ever Scontra Center big 3-day conference. So I just want to thank all of you for helping us make it a success. And there's a couple people who are not here to hear this directly, but hopefully they will receive this. We had a lot of support throughout this event. And we have great resources here at USM. So I just want everybody to recognize every time you came into a room and you saw the chair set up a certain way, you saw the tables, that was our facilities department, happens to be members of the Teamsters Union. We also, our food service department and our conference services department just were incredible and made things very easy for us. So even though they're not here, let's give them a round of applause to recognize their labor. And someone else, he spent a lot of the time back in a booth in Hannaford Hall. You didn't see him, now you get to see him. Zach Lambert, every time you hear the audio right now, all of the audio, all of the video that in my opinion came seamlessly and flawlessly was all Zach working behind the scenes. So we owe Zach a big debt of gratitude. So thank you. So to kick off our final event here, our last plenary, talking about things that we can do in the future and going forward. I'm going to turn it over to our panel after I introduce them. Our moderator is Todd Cretion. Todd is an educator and farmer and also co-chair of the Maine DSA. Cynthia Finney, who we've seen a few times the last couple of days. Cynthia is president of the Maine AFL-CIO, all-around wonderful person, also a farmer in her own right. The Wayne Farmers Market's greatly represented today. And then our next guest has come here all the way from New York City via Boston. Brandon Mancia is the director of the United Auto Workers Region 9A, which covers 50,000 members throughout the Northeast and Puerto Rico. And Meg Sinclair is a nurse at Maine Med and a steward with the Maine State Nurses Association. This is her second time appearing at a Scontra Center event, so we're very excited to have Meg. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Todd. Sorry, I'm Matthew Emick. I'm the director of the Scontra Center here. Sorry.
Also a wonderful person, right? Well, very happy to see everybody here. Is that too loud if I speak this closely? Okay, very happy to see everybody here tonight. It's been a great conference. Really want to thank the Scontra Center and Matt and Katie and Zach for doing all this incredible work and all the people behind the scenes making it possible. The idea behind this panel really came together after hearing Brother Sean Fain from the United Auto Workers call for a 2028 strike. To align contracts, to bring workers together, to overcome divisions in the labor movement, and to try to really put forward workers' voices as a leading edge of social change in the United States. And that is, long overdue for this round of our political lifetimes. But workers' struggles have always been at the forefront of change in the United States. And we're here at this Just Transitions conference today to understand how do we see labor not simply as an interest group, but as a part of society that can help lead other sections of society in a direction that we need to go in our world today. And that was true from the first May Day back in the 1880s, fighting for the 8-hour day. That was true during the 1930s, fighting for the basic organization of unions across this country. And actually, it was truer more recently than you might think. One of the last great wasn't quite a general strike, but the closest thing that I think we've had to a general strike wasn't in the 1930s or in our lifetimes. It wasn't in the 30s and the 40s. It was actually in 2006. The Day Without an Immigrant in 2006 mobilized absolutely millions of immigrant workers across the country to shut down whole cities. I was living in Oakland at the time. We had a march in San Francisco of 250,000 people. In Oakland of 100,000 people, and in San Jose of another 150,000 people. So 400,000 people in the Bay Area, driven by immigrant workers that absolutely shut down most industries in the Bay Area that day. And that was reproduced in Chicago, that was reproduced in Los Angeles, reproduced in Houston, lots of enormous mobilization. So we have seen, even within our lifetimes, and I know there's some young people here, but I think everybody gets within our lifetimes, if we're talking 2006, hopefully, that in our lifetimes, we've seen working class people play a leading role in trying to not just fight for themselves in their own bargaining unit at their own job, but fight for society in general. And that struggle in 2006 dulled the edge of the anti-immigrant offensive considerably in the 2000s. we are now seeing the revenge of history taken out on the immigrant working class by Trump and his minions. But we should not forget that episode of mass struggle, of mass strike in the United States. So anyway, now we're trying to update it. And so we're looking for how can the labor movement in this country speak for itself and speak for the wider community? And what do we need to do to put that into motion? So we're really happy today to have an excellent panel with us. And I think I might go in this direction. I think I might start with Brandon to kind of give us the overview of what the UAW is thinking, and then maybe go to Meg to talk about how that works on the shop floor at Maine Med and in other places, and then go to Cynthia for opening remarks about how this all fits together in this Just Transition conference. So with that, I'll throw it over to Brandon.
You can hear me? All right. Good evening, everyone. Or I guess it's early evening at this point. I want to thank the center and also Matthew and Todd for the invitation, and I'm honored to be here with these panelists and honored to be here with all of you. Before I get into talking about the call for May Day 2028, I do want to first say that we should all be in solidarity with the University of Maine Grad Workers Union, who are UAW, who just this week reached the 500 days without a first contract. One of the hardest things to do in the labor movement is not just win your union election, but win that first contract that actually solidifies and concretizes all the gains and all the rights and protections and raises that you've been fighting for to get in the first place. So it's absolutely essential that we win the first contract at the University of Maine. And I know, some of our committee members and members are here today. So stand in solidarity with them. I'm sure there's going to be an escalating plan of action over the next few weeks, months ahead, so that we can win justice at the University of Maine. So first of all, shout out to them. So I was talking earlier with a smaller group of y'all. One of the questions I always get about May Day 2028, because that has excited so many folks across the country. One of the first questions I get is, what's going to happen? What are we doing on May Day 2028? And my answer always starts with, well, we're going to be doing something. In the UAW, the big three automakers, Ford, GM, and Stellantis, the three companies that we struck in 2023, our contracts expire for our members there on April 30th, 2028. That's why this whole idea came up in the first place. It wasn't just to revive the symbolic importance of May Day, which is definitely a part of this, and to get that historical memory and muscle back. The whole idea is that we also have a contract, really, literally a contract expiring, 3 contracts expiring that day. We've taken that fight to Volkswagen. We're fighting for a first contract there after winning the first union election of a foreign, transplant automaker in the country, the German auto company. They have the plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We finally, after many attempts, won our union election there. And the fight to win a first contract there includes an expiration of April 30th, 2028. We've taken this call to other industries that we represent, from higher education to aerospace to submarine designers to you name it, legal services workers, nonprofits, you name it. Where possible, we're constantly trying to align contracts. So that's the first step. It's putting a call out there to all national unions, local unions, central labor councils, state feds, et cetera, to try to prioritize something that hasn't really happened at a wider level within the labor movement, which is to coordinate with each other and live up to that concept that we're stronger the more of us are actually out there fighting together. We shouldn't be in silos anymore. We shouldn't just be the auto workers over here, university workers over here, cinema workers over here, retail over. There's no power in us fighting the very same fights we take at every single employer in the silos that we're in. Right? There's strategic power with your employer when you take on that fight, and you have leverage over your employer. But if we're talking about social change, if we're talking about putting working class political demands back on the table in this country, if we're talking about standing up for Medicare, Medicaid, standing up for Social Security and retirement security, period, we're going to have an actual coordinated, organized effort of workers, and no one is better positioned to lead that fight than unions. And so that's the first step of this. The second is that it's going to take a lot of organizing. You usually see, calls for a general strike. It's usually a tweet or a poster or some, random call from someone who has no idea what it takes to pull off a strike to begin with, and let alone a general strike. So it takes conversations. It takes what's happening right here. It takes, locals talking to their national unions and going to their conventions and bringing resolutions forward. It takes those national unions going to their state fed or going to the AFL and trying to get that organizing push going. It takes workers themselves saying, we're part of a broader working class movement, and we need to fight and stand alongside the rest of the workers in our city, in our town, in our state. So this is the whole point has been of this call, is to animate a conversation amongst unions and workers across, across the country, to then take action. And I think one part that I don't think gets as appreciated about this is not just, we're calling on, union members and unions, already established unions, to try to set up, align your contract or take action on May Day, whatever that will look like. We actually have to organize the millions of workers who don't currently have a union, but we know want to be in a union, want to improve their lot in life, and actually bring them into the fight. And I think if we look at May Day 2028 as a horizon, for us to also, put the challenge on our unions to actually organize, alongside millions of workers for the first time, that's also going to be a worthwhile effort, because right now union density in this country is about 8%, 9%, right? I mean, it really depends. Then you go state by state, it varies. It's the state where I'm from, New York City, has a much higher union density, but we're still only talking like 20%. We're not talking something crazy here. So union density, period, in this country is low, but that doesn't mean that workers don't have power, right? It's how to harness and organize that power, because nothing moves without working class people, right? Whether you work at a hospital or a school or a factory, or an airport. The last thing I'll say before I pass it on is that the second question I get about May Day is about May Day being too far away. Right? From one perspective, May Day 2020 is important because it's a horizon. We get to organize. We have 3 years to do it. We had 4.5 years when that first call went out. But there's time and there's organizing and there's planning that has to go into this, right? These kinds of conversations need to keep happening in more states and more cities amongst more unions. But it's also far away because we're going through a billionaire coup right now in this country. They're coming after everything. They've already attacked federal workers, nullified the contracts of close to 1 million workers in the federal sector. And it's not going to stop there. We know that it's part of the billionaire playbook to come after collective bargaining rights and unions and workers' rights, period. Doesn't matter what sector you're in. Doesn't matter if they think it's a PMC woke industry or something, right? It doesn't matter if it's somewhere they think is only waste, fraud, and abuse, because it's on taxpayer dollars or something. No, they're coming after everyone. They're taking steps in their playbook, but it starts with the federal workers. Next, it's going to be trying to challenge the rest of the agencies that they haven't called into question because the first ones were for national security purposes. They get away with that, then they go over to the next workers. Then the NLRA is in question. Is that even constitutional? Then there's the pressure on the states and their public sector unions. Like, we don't have it at the federal sector anymore. Why would you have it at the state level? And it's going to keep going on and on and on. And that's going to go hand in hand with the attacks on our social safety net, our barely hanging on social safety net to begin with. And it's not going to be enough for us to be waging defensive battles, right? Hands off, right? That's the cry right now. I'm really impressed and in awe of the actions that happened today in this state and across the country. But right now we're in defense mode, right? Hands off is defensive. It's get off of me. Right. It's not what we actually have to do, which is to give a positive vision for the fight going forward. It's not just hands off Medicare, it's Medicare for all. It's not just hands off Social Security, it's pensions for all, it's retirement security for all. It's retirement security for people who don't even have a 401k, let alone, we're talking about saving Social Security. This is the kind of conversation that we need to be having, and that's what May Day 2028 is all about. So I'm really excited to hear from all of you, the questions you have, and obviously my panelists here who are thinking deeply about this. And yeah, I'd love to also tie in the climate question. The just transition framework was really important to the fight that we took on against the big three, and the work we did there in winning the record contracts we did. So I'm happy to go into that as well. But thank you all.
Can you guys hear me? All right. Unlike Brandon, I need to read off of a screen a little bit because I can't ad-lib out very well at all. Again, my name's Meg. I'm a nurse. I work at Maine Medical Center in the emergency department. I've been a nurse for 11 years. Been at Maine Med for like 6. And I'm a steward with the Maine State Nurses Association. So yeah, I'm gonna talk more, I think, about like what I think like strike readiness means, on the shop floor, I guess. So in reflecting on this discussion, I find myself reminded that strike readiness is simply a surrogate for your strength as a bargaining unit as a whole. Strike readiness isn't going to matriculate itself overnight. Rather, it's a culmination of the efforts by union members in the years between contracts, or even during the months and years spent organizing in preparation for a union election. To kind of make that like more personal, we formed our union in 2021 at Maine Med, ratified our first contract in 2022. And at that time, we were nowhere ready, strike readiness. And we had been organizing since the 80s, honestly, but with this most current run, for 2 or 3 years. So we were organizing for a long time, but strike readiness just wasn't even close. So I think, echoing what Brandon said, 2028 is a reasonable goal because strike readiness isn't easy to build. That's all to say. I'm speaking to preparing for strike readiness as a nurse that's never been on strike, despite working at 3 different unionized hospitals. But hopefully it's coming up in December of 2025 with the work that we've done when our contract expires. So to speak to building solidarity, I just kind of have some what I think are tangible examples that work in the nursing world, at least. I think paramount to building solidarity, first and foremost, is getting FaceTime with new hires in your bargaining unit. At Maine Med, in our contract language, we have guaranteed 30-minute minimum union orientation built into the broader employee orientation. At these orientations, nurses are able to give a lay of the land to new hires, outline big wins in our first contract, answer any questions, make sure people fill out membership forms, and connect them with leaders on their unit. And I think especially, a lot of nurses that are jumping in the workforce are 23 years old and don't really know what a union is or the value of it. So just kind of inoculating on that first day and physically handing them a contract and putting a face to what's going on, I think is really valuable. So at these orientation meetings, ideally, whatever nurse runs the session will then reach out to stewards on the appropriate unit where these new hires are going and be like, you've got a couple new hires headed your way. And that triggers the stewards on the unit themselves to introduce themselves so the new hires feel comfortable approaching union leaders, and further strengthening that connection. And then next, once you've made a connection with your coworkers, with members in your bargaining unit, identifying what that member cares about, both broadly and individually, is really crucial. Because that way, once your union has made big wins, you can circle back to that person and reinforce the importance of the union and why it matters, and taking a victory lap on whatever you've won. So that's all to say, tangible instances of wins via collective action build solidarity, because it's saying we did this, imagine what else we can do. In my world, that might mean having one-to-one conversations with nurses to find out what specific issues they care about. One example from the ED is a bunch of nurses hated the type of thermometer we were using, and we like did a little action and got a bunch of signatures, and we got a different kind of thermometer. And they're really nice. And so, that's like a nice, easy win. And then other big ones that we're going to fight for in our contract are, we need to increase our 403B match. So naturally during these one-to-one combos, you're able to identify like the broader issues as well. So in my world, I'd equate that to issues widely felt across the department. So for example, in the ER, workplace violence is a huge problem. And a theme I hear from members when I ask them, what are you willing to fight for in our next contract, is a safer work environment. And so I'm going to jump into this story that's kind of long, but let's go through it. Due to our profit-driven healthcare system in tandem with embarrassingly low federal funding for those with chronic and debilitating mental illness, often our most vulnerable patients are left to rot in a windowless locked psych unit in the basement of main med, which is where the ED is located. While social workers and case managers fight tirelessly to establish a safe and dignified discharge plan. And during that tireless fight, these patients are just kind of stuck in the basement in this pretty miserable limbo. It comes at no surprise that when an individual whose illness renders them with decreased executive function is held captive in a dark, loud, and chaotic environment with no natural sunlight or autonomy or day-to-day consistency, that individual it has an increased propensity to resort to violence. In the recent past, we had a patient in that locked psych unit who was there for 8 months, and that's not an exaggeration. And in that time frame, he inflicted very serious bodily harm on an unknown quantity of ER staff, like concussions and black eyes and scratches on the face. And one person was strangled, and it was really horrible. So the nurses came together, identified tangible and reasonable means to help prevent episodes where the patient would resort to violence. And generally that means tighter ratios. We have the security presence at Main Med, and they're actually really good at de-escalating, not physically. So we made these reasonable demands to our direct management. And they gave us, this was during organizing, they gave us like there's a lot going on behind the scenes. We're doing everything we can. And so we were like, okay, like let's take this a step further. So we went in with another petition similar to the thermometers, but this time it was like 95% of the nurses in the ED signed the petition outlining those reasonable demands, and management came back with just a flat out no. The chief nursing officer gave us the response at that time, so we knew like we were making some waves if he got called in. And I do think that when workers come together and make reasonable demands for the safety of their, in my case, patients and staff, and management comes back and just says no and treats you like a bunch of toddlers, that's a win in its own right. Because if you have a unified message, you can go talk to your members and be like, look at what we did. Like, we did everything we could to fix this problem, and we just were told no. So what are we going to do next? And then it is a nice segue into talking about how withholding your labor is your most powerful bargaining tool. Because like people don't, I think strike literacy is hard. Like people just think like, oh, I can't leave my patients, I can't leave my students. So it's just so that's a win in its own right. Them saying no is a win in its own right. But then we didn't strike right after that. We kept escalating the issue, but it was a nice point of the conversation. And so anyway, for this issue fight, our next step was to reach out to our brothers and sisters throughout the hospital and the community and the media. And we planned this public action in front of the hospital, and nurses from all over, and Counselor Victoria Pelletier and members of the media met us out front. And Main Med they conceded to all of our reasonable demands, because we had this power inside. And so we took it to the community. If you don't have the power inside, you take it to the community, you're going to fall flat on your face. But hours before we held this public action, the hospital told us they were going to give us what we asked for, but we still had the action anyway to kind of rub their noses in it. And that felt really good. And then like next, we've got this win. It was huge. It was really important. And it is taking the victory lap and like clearly saying like, we won this because of our union. We never would have won this without collective action. is really important, because I think otherwise people are just like, oh, the hospital was being nice, you know, so like being like, no, this had nothing to do with the hospital. And so I spent a lot of time talking about that because I think it's a great representation of figuring out what your members caring about, determining if it's like widely felt enough to escalate it to a fight. You only want to pick fights that like, you know, you only want to escalate a fight that like, you're like, we're going to win this one, because you don't, well, hearing no is a means to agitate. Like, you want to be strategic in what fights you pick and when. And then strategizing internally to figure out like what the best steps are to back the boss into a corner and make them concede and make them look like an asshole. And so just a couple other things that I think are important to like building solidarity, and that I've learned from like organizers with MSNA and NNU is like finding leaders in your workplace, like people that like people really look up to them. They're like, that's a hard worker. Like they communicate well, they're respected. And that person probably isn't your loudest, proudest union member. They might not even know if they like are supportive of a union or not, but like if they're a good worker, they will be if you talk to them the right way. And like corner them into becoming a leader. Like I got into this in like 2020 and I would have never dreamed of like doing something like this. So it took other nurses, like my coworker, Amy Strum, like forcing me into this in a way. And then like when you have these good workers jumping in on the fight, it inspires more members to do the same. And motivating members to do some work for themselves. Like instead of reciting contract language at someone for the millionth time, be like, oh, let me help you with that. Like, do you know where your contract is? And so they're not just like going to the one union person they know, make them become a union person. And then like just get members' feet wet and engaging with something. And like the example I have here is like local legislators, like the nurses are advocating for a safe nurse to patient ratios bill, LD 1281, and like being like, email your rep, call them, like go to the state house, go do something. Because I think that primes them for a larger collective action down the line. And that's what I've got. Yeah.
Thanks, Meg. All right, Cynthia, you're up.
All right. That was a great background and setup. And I guess I'm charged with what does this have to do with our theme here today about just transitions and the green economy and labor and climate. So as you've heard in different words from different people, the ability to withhold labor is workers' strongest leverage point, and particularly the ability to do it collectively. And as you've also heard, it doesn't just happen spontaneously. I can't tell you how many emails or even phone calls or Facebook messages I get from people when something happens that says, we need to get people in the streets. These are usually from people who aren't a member of a union that's affiliated with us. Oh, which I did want to say a little more for those of you who haven't been here for 3 days and heard me talk 6 times already. My organization is a federation of unions across the state of Maine. So about 220 different labor organizations representing all kinds of workers and made up of all kinds of workers, it's a combination of the two, about 40,000 workers. So usually I get those. I don't think I've ever gotten one of those from someone who was a member of an affiliated union, and probably they're not even a member of a union, but they think that labor knows how to get people in the streets. So we need to get people in the streets. How many of you remember the Arab Spring? And when you read about that, didn't that seem like people just were so fed up and so against the wall that finally they took to the streets? That is what it looked like in the news. I had the privilege of hearing from some of those Egyptian workers at the Labor Notes conference. And what they told us was that leading up to those world awakening actions over the previous, I think it was 2 years, there were 400 strikes around the country of people getting ready, of people in little groups here and there, or bigger groups here and there, reaching that wall, deciding they were fed up, using that ultimate power, going on strike. And so it was building and building. We didn't see any of that in the news. I mean, of course, they can't report it. So So, that's the picture of that. So another thing that you might not know about, how many of you remember, and here's where I'm going to start connecting us to topic. How many of you remember the Los Angeles teachers strike? Most, which one? The most recent one,
right.
which I can't remember what year it was now. But anyway, those workers, 30,000 of them, across, I think, 900 schools, had 95% out, I think, strike. 95% of those workers were in the streets along with their families of their children and the community. Well, they were striking not only for working conditions and wages within the school, but they were striking and negotiating also for benefits in the community. They were striking for green space for their children to be able to be in when they weren't in school. And I don't remember the whole list of other things, but there was an entire list of community improving demands that were part of what they went to the bargaining table with. And those are not things that management has to negotiate over. But if you have enough power, as Meg was describing, if you can bring enough power and leverage to the bargaining table with you, you can get management, which in this case was the city of Los Angeles, to bargain with you over many more things that you want. A lot of you have heard me say more than once in terms of our climate goals as a species, maintain a climate in which we can all thrive. Something a good friend of mine said back in 2018, that to achieve that will require unprecedented solidarity. Think about that and think about what that means. That doesn't mean taking to the street with your friends. It means taking to the street with your friends and your neighbors. Meg talked about going around and talking with her coworkers that maybe those leaders that they'd identified that maybe weren't even a big union supporter, but because they were people that had followers, the nurses union members understood that they needed those leaders to bring along their departments to the actions they were having. That's what unprecedented solidarity is. It's building across all those boundaries. And it takes time, it takes effort, it takes conversations with people that you don't know yet, or it takes conversations with people you do know and you don't like. A lot of that. And I think you also heard from a couple of the previous speakers about a vision. What are we fighting for? Now, some people like to get out in the streets just because it's fun, but not most people. Most people want to see something that's valuable enough to make it and a believable enough path to get that valuable thing that it's worth inconveniencing themselves or taking great risk to get it. They want to see a plan that's believable to get something that's worth getting to take that risk. Because another thing that you hear about when we talk and think about strikes is all of the workers who can't strike. Actually, they can't strike legally. Any worker can refuse to work. The cost is just higher for some of them if they do it without enough solidarity from other workers. But if they have enough solidarity from other workers, the Los Angeles teachers' strike was not a legal strike. The West Virginia teachers' strike was not a legal strike. But they had enough people that it didn't matter. I suspect that many of the rights that we have to gather and to demonstrate and to do things are going to be pinched, if not eliminated, in the coming period of time. So these are things we need to take seriously and think about making connections with people, that we build enough trust that people are willing to take risks together in big enough numbers to accomplish the things that we can agree on are worth taking those risks for. Unions know how to do this better than a lot of other people. I was actually going to refer to that day of what was it? What did they call it? The day of
Day without an
the
immigrant.
day without an immigrant. Yeah, I was going to refer to that because that was something that really illustrated. I think we need to organize even more thoroughly than that for if this is going to be a tool that we're going to use. And so what Sean Fain called for was aligning contracts, which creates the possibility of more power. The Unite Here union, which is a union of restaurant and hotel workers, over a period of about 15 years, worked to align all their contracts really around the world. And I don't know if you remember when they went on strike. What year was that? Do you remember? I don't remember. It wasn't very long ago. It was right around COVID time. But anyway, they were able, because their contracts aligned for different workers in different hotels really around the world. You know, Boston was on strike, New York was on strike, Houston was on strike. It wasn't just 150 hotel workers, you know, have more than that in Boston. But anyway, it wasn't just them. There was, you know, thousands of them in many large cities where Marriott and others had hotels around the. So building that power, that's what Sean Fain is talking about. How do we strategically position ourselves so that that power is believable, so that workers can see it well enough to take it? And I'm going to say that, you know, the vast majority of the United States is working class, whether they have a job or not. You know, maybe someone else in their family has a job, maybe nobody in their family has a job, but they're working class and they work for a living and they do something that contributes to their community. And part of the success of the West Virginia teachers' strike was that they went all in with the whole community. They organized before they went out from work. One of the things, West Virginia, like Maine, is a very poor state. Those children depend on getting lunch at school. And so the teachers organized to be sure that those children were going to be able to get lunch when school was closed because they were out on strike. So it's this kind of solidarity. It's this kind of taking the big view. It's this kind of looking at who is our whole entire community that we need to go for these goals that we're going to shape and elucidate together. And how do we use our leverage to get there?
Thanks, everybody. That was a great start to this discussion. I'm going to reverse the order now, and I'm going to go back with a question for each of you. So I'm going to start with Cynthia. And listening to you at the farmers market, but also over the course of the weekend, you talk a lot about trust and the need, any organizing model, any mobilizing model, any political model, any union model has to be based on trust. And if you try to skip that step, you get a whole lot of nothing. We've got in this state a series of crises. If people just remember to last winter, we had a series of devastating storms that wrecked the coast that were unprecedented in terms of their damage to the economy. Speaking of CMP workers and Versant workers being out for days and days and days, and actually electrical workers from all over the country coming here to help us get back up on our feet. So we've got that type of climate disruption. We have another type of climate disruption, which is not only climate, but is part of it is around the world, people are being forced to leave their homes and come here. So we sometimes can be a little provincial, speaking as somebody who was born in Bangor, it can be a little provincial about who's a real Mainer. But there are a lot of new Mainers coming from all over the country and all over the world. And in fact, the Maine working class is being remade, being reshaped. It always has been that way, but it's being reshaped around us today. And in the coming years, we saw this a little bit during COVID. Part of the reason you can't get an apartment or buy a house in Southern Maine is because a lot of people who have a lot more means from around the country bought up a second home in Maine. So they'd have a place, sort of a climate health refuge. So we've got two possible futures for the state. And if we say that when you come into the state, you might've seen this driving in, Brandon, it says the way life should be. And it's either gonna be the way life should be for these wealthy climate refugees who are looking to set up shop and work remotely, or it's going to be the way life should be for a new working class in Maine, or a recomposing working class. So my question is, not only how do we deal with that climate catastrophe, but how do we build trust amongst not only the currently unionized, but we've probably got even lower unionization rate amongst new Mainers. And so the question of climate, of immigration, and of solidarity, what is it going to take to build that kind of trust? And if you have any examples of that working, the Construction Academy is one of those, any examples of how the unions are trying to build that base, that trust within this section of the working class in Maine, the new Mainers.
Yeah. But before I say that, just in case you didn't already figure it out, does the question that Todd just raised suddenly give you a light bulb about why they're so death on what they call DEI? Because it builds solidarity. It's about building solidarity and understanding. So, so we do a number of things to try to build those bridges and help other people think about having even more ideas for building those bridges. Todd mentioned the UCA, which is our Union Construction Academy, which I spoke about briefly in the last workshop, but which is a pre-apprenticeship program that reaches out to constituencies that might not find their way into union jobs, that don't have the greatest job opportunities, whether it's because they're just coming out of the justice system, whether it's because they're women who aren't who are generally, in general, funneled toward lower paying jobs, and union jobs in general are higher paying jobs. Whether it's folks who are new to this country who either struggle with English or just plain don't know the rules and how we do things here. Or someone who's got a lot of aptitude but hasn't had the opportunity to really kind of get comfortable around tools. So this pre-apprenticeship program is designed for folks like that. It's 4 weeks to set them up to be able to both get an array and an exposure to what are the different union apprenticeships that are available, and also to give them skills, understanding, knowledge, and connections to help them be able to succeed if they choose to continue. So, I'll say that was a federally funded program. Yes, we lost the money. The state has found it for us. There's a bill in the legislature to help. You also have to do work when you do that, if you're going to bring folks that are from different backgrounds and have different cultures into our unions or any other organization, you need to work so that they feel welcome, because we don't all necessarily, culturally conditioned to be a little cold to people who are different from us. And also, if you don't understand what looks welcoming to someone from X culture or Y culture, that maybe isn't what looks welcoming to those of us from our culture. And so the work is slow, it's incomplete, it's so far completely inadequate, but it's inching forward. We have the A. Philip Randolph Institute, which is our constituency group for union members of color, at which everyone is welcome. And that group consistently since 2018, several times a year, we do all kinds of different programming that helps people understand each other better, learn about history of different cultures in our state and in the country, think about ideas that have to do with solidarity across racial boundaries, and also have fun together. We had our dinner this year with speakers running immigration workshops to help people understand the big picture around immigration that have been really well received. We've done them 3 times. We're going to keep doing them. Lots of stuff like that. So that's a small sample of some of the things we're doing to do that. It's not enough yet. We need a whole lot more people doing it.
Thanks, Cynthia. All right, Meg, your turn. You're up. All right. So you spoke about how to get strike ready and all the work that goes into that. And it struck me that, so to speak, looking at the protest today, it was great. I was down there. There were probably 3,000 people out in the streets. The teachers from Portland actually had a contingent of about 75 people that came out of their picket at Deering and Rowe Elementary a couple of weeks ago. So they're using that kind of internal organization to broadcast their message into that rally. But in general, the rally was off of Facebook. People came there as individuals, and they heard some speeches, and then they go home. Now, what we want, or they came back here, right? We came back here. And there's a real crisis, it strikes me, in the American social movements of how to get people involved. And so all the lessons you spoke about the new workers coming into the hospital, about reaching out to the people who are, they don't think of themselves as leaders, but they are people who other people respect. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about your experience in the hospital, your experience in the nurses union, and how that's applicable to those people who came out to the protest today. What if you had 100 of them here, who are not the people here because they were already here at the conference, but if we could have brought 100 of those people back here, what are a couple lessons you would give them about how to form organization, how to form networks, how to make their voices heard more effectively?
I think for, like when you're talking about like a non-unionized group of people or like just like a community, like I feel like a good way to like, it's just like, how do you empower someone or how do you empower a group of people? So like in the nursing world, we talked about like, we won our thermometers and that felt good, but like maybe that goal is a little different for like a group of people. Like what I was thinking about is like I bring my son to the library like every Tuesday and Thursday, and there's a bunch of moms there who were always there, and we talk about how we support the childcare workers who had their strike, which was pretty sick a couple weeks ago, and like maybe a win for that would be like coming together and being like, oh, like we're gonna get like all of us to call our legislator, or like just like setting a goal and like attaining that goal, and that's that win, and then just like kind of like building up on, empowering people to like actually do something. And I am like honing in on this like state representative and legislative stuff because I went to Labor Lobby Day last week, and I don't know who said it, but someone, one of the AFL staffers was like, I was talking to a rep who said, oh yeah, I've heard a lot about people advocating for this bill. A lot of my constituents have talked to me about this bill. And the AFL person was like, oh, like how many constituents? And the rep said, oh, like 6 or 7. So like, and I'm like, that's crazy.
Right.
And there are things that we can really like win at the state level. So I think like recency bias. But so anyway, I think just like setting a goal and meeting that goal and then celebrating it, I think is yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Brendan, you're up. You talked about time, and some people say 2008, it's too soon. Some people 2028. I've lost track of time myself. It happens when you get a little. 2028, it's too far away. 2028, it's too soon. And just looking at what the Trump administration is doing now in terms of overall energy policy, I think one of the big wins in the round of struggle was the question of going into the battery factories and the whole EV industry. That seems, it's very strange because who runs a electric car company. It seems completely uninterested in that policy. But as the government tries to smash up different parts of what we've assumed we're going to be part of this transition, how do you deal with those mini crises or big crises as they come without getting thrown off the longer term game plan? And then for instance, if they go after the EV industry and they're already tearing up the subsidies. And so if that leads to a crisis in the EV industry, how do you deal with that particular crisis in the time frame of trying to take the time to build towards 2028? So it's kind of about the moment, and conversely, how do you take advantage of those crises to make that longer term organizing stronger? So just if you could talk a little bit about how do you see dealing with the short term crises, the medium term 2028 plan, and then the timeline that we're all facing in terms of this more existential climate crisis. Gigantic question. If you could just answer it in a couple minutes.
So yeah, 2028, too far away, too soon, right? That's the struggle we have to deal with. I think to the earlier group that we spoke about this, I think we brought up the idea of a May Day 2025, 26, 27 being like dress rehearsals or practice for May Day 2028. And I think that's really important because it gives us, the ultimate goal and then markers, right? Like an organizing plan. We get some unions and some community groups and social movements to this one. We assess. Next year, we keep building, right? We're always building. We're developing those organizing muscles. Some people called it like exercising, right? So that's the goal, I think, right now. And I think for folks who are actively planning for what May Day 2025 looks like, in Maine. I think that's, you need to link up and talk to each other about that, because it's going to be really important to do that. You can't just expect people to show up on May 1st, 2028, ready to go if we haven't done anything in the meantime. Yeah, I can talk at length about the electric vehicle industry and whatnot, but I think I can try to kind of get to the big picture within what you call the mini crisis. On the one hand, you've got Elon Musk, who wants to use the government right now to protect all of his industries and companies, right? So that just with SpaceX or Tesla, I think he doesn't want Ford and GM to benefit from an electric vehicle transition. He wants it to all be Tesla or have Ford and GM and Stellantis fall behind. That matters because right now we don't have Tesla organized. That's an ongoing effort. It's a really hard one. His plants are massive. And the intimidation and retaliation that the union busing he engages in to keep the UAW out, it's massive. So he's Henry Ford of today.
Yeah.
Henry Ford was also a fascist, anti-Semite who, wanted to just screw over his workers as much as possible. And Ford now, likes to pride itself in its relationship with the UAW. But back then, they were the last one to fall. That just for you all to know. That's just like the history of that. And I think Elon Musk very much represents that. The politics of the EV transition and how it relates to all this, I think it gets to the core of the problem, which is that in any conversations about the just transition, we need to understand not just the material impact that it has in terms of when it's not a just transition, just simply a transition, just on the threats to the livelihoods and communities that are engaging in industries that contribute to climate change. But we're also talking about a politics, right? How do you build political support for something that seems like it's going to actually cost you your job? And that's a huge task. And it is not easy. And within the UAW, I'll tell you, the word electric vehicle is an unpopular word within the auto sector, not because auto workers, your average auto worker wants to see the climate destroyed, right? But because in the history of NAFTA, of plant closures, of communities being decimated by our policies and by corporate greed, you're going to add another thing onto this to make us lose what we already have and have struggled to keep. That's a huge threat. So with the Biden administration, we saw an opening, and here's the contradiction. Whether it was the IRA or the CHIPS Act and all this like industrial policy that the Biden administration was promoting, with different levels of union engagement with that. Ultimately, at the very beginning, what came of it was a lot of corporate subsidies. Now, you need investment. Right now, there's a lot of debate about the tariffs. One big piece missing from this tariff debate is actual like investment in manufacturing buildup, right? It's like you can't do tariffs and then also not build up capacity to rebuild manufacturing. Biden was doing it the other way around, like no actual like hounding and penalties on corporations, but at the same time, like trying to build up capacity. So it's very strange how Trump and Biden sometimes kind of exist on a continuum. That's going to be interesting to keep seeing. But what Biden was doing was basically giving Ford like millions of dollars to set up shop, right, in order to then link up with a South Korean company, for example. I'll give you an example, Ultium, which is SK affiliated, so it's a South Korean company, to basically get around the UAW contract. Ultium is important because it's in Lordstown, Ohio. In 2019, the GM facility, if you know the Chevy Cruze does not exist anymore because Lordstown used to build it. They shut down the Lordstown facility. Donald Trump did absolutely nothing about the closure of the Lordstown GM plant. With the closure of the GM plant, you get an entire community that loses its tax base. People have to move out. Those workers who could retain their seniority have to then leave, and families were split. Someone had to go to Texas, someone had to go to Michigan, someone had to go to, wherever else they could find work. UAW work within GM. And, the school district suffered, small business community suffered, drugs and opioids become a problem. People have to go to Dollar General to work, which is extremely exploitative, business. So the service sector, right? It's very low union density. So when we talk about plant closures, right, within the UAW, when we're talking about auto factories closing, we're talking about an entire town falling apart as a result of corporate greed, because that work just goes to Mexico. And what happens is you go to Mexico, you set up a plant in Mexico, and you pay the same work, the worker for the same labor that gets done at $30 an hour in the United States, $5 an hour in Mexico. And that vehicle still gets charged at $70,000 markup price in the United States, where, it's not like, the Mexican people are buying these vehicles because they're super expensive. They're getting shipped back here to get, at these marked up prices. And so it's just a way to super exploit for profit for these companies. So the facility closes in Lordstown. For a couple of years, there's nothing. Then suddenly the Biden administration decides to allow, SK and GM to link up for this Ultium Cells battery plant. And what the Lordstown workers used to make $30 an hour with a pension, with good benefits. Suddenly now at Ultium, new EV battery work, we want to celebrate that. It's $15-16 an hour. And so folks are coming back into work unorganized, not in the UAW, and they're making $16 an hour for supposed auto work, and with no retirement security, no benefits, and a lot of medical debt. So this is the reality of what this transition looks like when it's not a just transition. We organized Ultium Cells, and then we had to fight GM to basically acknowledge that this is GM labor. These battery cells are going to be going into a General Motors vehicle, a Chevy vehicle. Don't pretend otherwise. South Korean law does not apply here. You're in the United States. You don't pretend like this is something else, right? This zone in which no government applies, but your corporate rules. And that's what happened. So we fought. And through the stand-up strike, the power of that strike, right? GM workers across the country going out in solidarity for each other, and Ford workers and Stellantis workers all going out on strike. We were able to get GM, we forced GM to agree that battery work, wherever they build it up, with whichever company they do a joint venture with, is going to be under the UAW Master GM agreement. That was the win, which means that if the transition to electric vehicles accelerates, those jobs need to be UAW jobs under the same contract. So if I was making $34 an hour with a pension, I'm going to be doing that at this new facility if I transfer to that facility. And that's what we have to talk about. So long term, just where are we in this EV transition? I think there's huge questions. What is Trump going to do about it? Are Biden's plans still going to be carried out? Where's all this investment going to go? Those are all huge questions. I have half answers to those at this moment. But the point has to be for unions, whichever sector you're in, that you have to see how this transition needs to be unionized. And that looks differently, right, in your different industries. But it's a much bigger political point, right, to be able to say, not just, we created all these alternative energy jobs and clean energy jobs and battery jobs. If I literally remember just 5 years ago, I used to work at the plant making $35 an hour. Now you're telling me I'm going to make $16 an hour. What political support from the working class in this country are you going to have for anything if that's the reality you're forcing them into?
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody. What we're going to do is we're going to take some questions from the audience, and then we're going to have a final comments for our speakers. So I want to leave about 10 minutes at the end for speakers to come back and wrap up anything they want to say. So we got about 20 minutes for questions or comments. And I just asked the audience to keep your comment or question to a minute or so, just so we have time to get a lot of people. I'd really like to encourage people who are in unions to speak up. And if you're not in a union and this is the first you've heard of it, please speak up as well. So no question is too small or too big. So with that, we'll open up the floor. Just raise your hand. And are we going to use? Yeah, we're going to use the microphone. So Katie's going to help. Sure. And then while this person is speaking, if you could raise your hand, we'll kind of keep a list going. Okay.
Hi, quick question. What organizations in Maine are heading up the work on organizing Maine for the?
I wouldn't say that there's any consensus in Maine about the 2028 action. Sean Fain from UAW, so I'll let you speak to the question. Sean Fain has put out the invitation. Not a plan yet, and it wasn't that long ago that he put it out. We're talking about it though.
Great, good question. Thank you.
I would say right now what's happened is on the union side, the American Federation of Teachers, the American Postal Workers have committed to try to align contracts for May Day. We're having more conversations with the national unions. But I would encourage all of you to, if you're in a union, right, to talk about this, what makes sense for you, what you're, whether you're having a negotiation that comes up that you can look towards May 1st or April 30th, 2028 as an expiration day. We do have a UAW presence in Maine. We have members in Local 2320. We have the UMaine grad workers. BAF Ironworks goes into bargaining next year, where we represent the draftsmen. So we're all talking about the importance of April 30th, 2028 as an expiration.
Yeah, go to the back first, and then we'll come up here.
Thank you all for your comments. Cynthia, you mentioned earlier the importance of having a vision of what people are willing to sacrifice something for, and how that's something that we need to formulate together. What does that look like in these next 3 years going to 2028? How, especially if we're thinking about this national scale, what do those conversations on a national scale look like? And are the, demands, is the goal to have those demands be pretty consistent across the board, or for different unions to have different, of course, different workers have different priorities. So in your mind, any of your perspectives, what does that look like?
I think we'll get to feel that out as we go, but I can say that sort of how it's starting is we're doing, of course, the ability to have a democracy and a society that we can participate in is fundamental to being part of doing what we need to do for climate. And so we are very actively, pretty much every minute of every day, I'd say right now, assessing what's happening at the national level and figuring out which parts of that are going to resonate broadly within our constituency, which is unionized workers, which are across the political spectrum, so that they can be mobilized. So if you've seen workers talking about the cuts to Social Security Administration and the VA on television or on the radio lately, that's our work. We've connected those workers with the media. Those are issues that we think will, and they have resonated broadly to help people see that this, what's happening right now is targeting everyone. So it's kind of work like that. It's thinking about what are the things that are going to resonate. And then in terms of the climate, I think it's things like what we're doing here that the Scontress Center put together. We do our work in the Maine Labor Climate Council, labor stayed away from environmental questions for a long time. And we've been working really hard to find a place where we can have enough agreement to enter that area of our social decisions without creating division that hurts everything else within our constituency. So we're having those kind of discussions and experiments in our Maine Labor Climate Council. And again, events like this help us have it more broadly. So.
I think the biggest sacrifice is going to be money. I think for a lot of people, like surrendering, striking, that's like, nurses have a lot of fear about striking, but like a lot of nurses are like single parents and like, they're like, I'm stand with you. I just like literally can't afford it. So I think like both saving up for a strike and like being willing to like help your peer strike like with money, I think is like a real reality. Like, and then UD has like a very limited strike fund, but it's not like, and it's not enough to cover like a general strike. So I think money is like a big, and we work for money. So yeah. It's like, we're not like actually angels or anything.
Oh yes, you are.
Yes,
Cynthia, you were talking about unprecedented levels of solidarity, and Brandon, you were mentioning the difference Mexico and the US. I know you wrote a great article, which I came across doing research for school. Our class has no borders about UAW and supporting Mexican auto workers. So my question for all of you, but maybe especially for Cynthia and Brandon, is what is the role of international solidarity in both the just transition and perhaps a general strike?
Before you guys jump in, if anybody, while they're answering, if anybody else wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. So
First off, it's recognizing that I think we're late to the game on May Day. It started here. It's became an international holiday, and then we lost that history. It was taken from us, and I think we have to get that back and make that our Labor Day in this country. So I think again, starting with this May Day and then making it an annual tradition all the way up till 2028, right? That's part of the effort here, is to actually revive that as an important holiday and a day of workers' action in this country. So internationalism is huge. The auto sector is it's a global industry. We are actively talking to the German, Japanese, and Korean and Mexican auto worker unions about coordination. This is way beyond the auto workers union. Obviously, we should be talking about this in every single one of our sectors. The attack on higher education right now is also, the far right is ascendant everywhere, and they always look at education and campuses as like their first targets, because that's precisely where free speech and opposing ideas are where they get talked about, and I think that's why they always see it as an enemy. So I think higher education labor should really see itself right now as an international movement. So on Mexico specifically, it's really important to recognize that the UAW's position is not like a nationalist, nativist one when it comes to the question of plant closures and work going to Mexico. The point of my article was right when we launched our Mexico Solidarity Project, to put organizing support and resources towards organizing independent Mexican unions. Because Mexican unions, for those of you who learn Mexican history, there was a state and co-optation of the unions that essentially set them up to be like company unions. And the unions, the traditional unions are also partners in the suppression of Mexican wages. It's a big myth that NAFTA benefited Mexico and led to, hurt U.S. and helped Mexico. It's by no means. If adjusting for inflation, Mexican wages were also suppressed in half. And I think as long as that divide exists, where we can make $35 an hour and they make $5 an hour, that's always going to be a problem. So international solidarity is key.
Second, international solidarity is key, and I think both the pushing back and finding ways to push back effectively on the anti-immigrant sentiment the flames are being fanned here in this country, but also Trump's version of America First is very much anti-worker, and his whole economic policy, whether he says so explicitly or not, is saying that those workers have your jobs and I'm going to bring them back here. And A, he's not going to bring them back here. And B, the problem is not that those workers have our jobs. The problem is that the money is all moving up to the top. And so I think we have to continue to find ways to say in ways that people can hear and examples that people can see how that is, so that they can see who it is that's really causing this problem. It's not who's having the fingers pointed at them right now. People need to understand that, because the international solidarity is key, because they can divide us along borders just as well as they can divide us along race or gender or any other line.
Okay, maybe time for 1-2 more questions. Anybody want to? All right, yes.
Mike Runner's going to ask one. Brandon, there are a few things that you said that really resonated with me. Like the stuff around moving from a defensive position, like a hands off, to an offensive. And then also just our density and that it's quite low. And when I think of the term a general strike, I feel like, what does that actually mean if we're only talking about current union members and aligning people that have contracts right now? And I mean, even some of the language around this, I find a little bit alienating sometimes of like, and this is no shade to anyone, but like the language around, I had a, $30 an hour job and we can't possibly go down to a 15-hour job where there are hundreds of thousands of workers who do work for those wages and even less. And that's their reality. So I guess my question is around like, when you think of a general strike, like, what do you mean by that? And how do you see the labor movement like moving more offensive and doing more organizing to get to this goal rather than staying in this like?
Yeah. So on the one hand, there's the contract alignment fight, right? Like the being able to have the established unions shoot for April 30th as an expiration, as the last day of the contract, so that May 1st, they're able to strike, with legal protections. We'll see about that, in the next few years. But one of the things that I think is really important to come back to is all of the non-union workers that want to be in a union right now. And so I see, maybe that wasn't like explicit in Sean Fain's call, but in our actions, we are trying to organize as many workers, especially in the industries we already represent. That's up to the rest of the labor movement to also get involved in organizing the unorganized in a massive way. So the only way we're going to get out of the political crisis that we're in right now and the lack of density is to try to actually organize out of that. And when organizing has happened at massive scales in this country, they tend to have happen in bursts. And, it doesn't come from this like patient, like small scale, like structure-based organizing. It usually comes in a burst, and we have to create the conditions for that. And so I think that's really important. And I'm really glad you brought up just the question of wages and how much people make. The $30 an hour plus, right? And now it's going to be like over 40 in some plants in the UAW. Like that's hard earned wages that we negotiate and fight and strike over. And all workers deserve to make that much money, if not more. No one should be making $15 an hour. And for folks who are making $15 an hour or less, like that's the point, right? It's just to fight and organize so that we raise the standards for all people. So someone, having been forced to go from their $30 an hour at Lordstown GM to Ultium making $16, it wasn't that like they're above making $16 like as a personal thing. It's that no, like I fought and struck over making what I make, and now you're literally undercutting me and union busting me to the point that now I'm making half of what I used to make. And we've set the standard already, right? That's what unions do. We raise the standard. If we start working at a university where people are making, I was making $25,000 as a grad student when I organized, my academic worker union at Harvard. We had to organize to get that up. And so that's just a constant fight there, is that the labor movement should be raising standards for all, because again, this is a time of crisis, but the truth is that we're living in a time of record profits, of corporate greed, of price gouging. The money is there, and we need to fight for it.
Excellent. Well, I think maybe we're going to leave it there. It's been an awesome weekend, but I'm going to throw it back for final comments, and I'm just going to say one thing and then see what you all think about this. I'm going to go in a new order. So we're going to start this time with Brandon, and then we're going to go Cynthia. We're going to give Meg the last word as a Portland named med nurse. Okay. So it strikes me that if our problem becomes that millions of people around the country see May Day 2028 as the thing that's going to solve all of their problems, if that's our problem, I will take that problem, right? Because it becomes a cultural mass phenomenon that people are talking about it. And if, as talking about strike ready, if we get to 2028 and the bosses concede immigrant rights and Medicare for all and the PRO Act, and we start taxing the rich like we did under Eisenhower, then maybe we'd call it off. We got enough, we'll call it off. But those two things are probably unlikely. Probably it's going to be a dogged fight to get this thing to happen, to get it to be a reality. And so it's going to be much more of a process than an end goal or a finished goal. So in terms of that method of organizing as process, and Brandon said things don't necessarily always happen as you plan them. I think that Trump is going to throw a lot of stuff at us in the next 3 years that are not going to be planned. But the point is, the better organized we are, and the more we use 2028 as a lever, as a tool to build that unity, to build that trust, as Cynthia talks about, to build that shop floor ready to strike, the better we're going to be able to deal with those short-term crises without just getting so thrown off our game that we forget about 2028 and what comes after. So just in that realm of thinking about now and then and the time and the work that it takes to organize, if everybody has some parting thoughts about examples that you think that you can do in your own union or in your own space, and one thing that people maybe in the audience could do. One recommendation. It doesn't have to be the best recommendation ever, but I think it's usually a good thing to walk out of a room feeling like, hey, that's a good idea. I'm going to try to do that. So we're going to start with Cynthia. No, Brandon. I said Brandon. Brandon. We're starting with Brandon.
Mhm.
All right. Take us home.
Yeah, the question of what can you do if you're not in a union, this is the time to organize. And there's plenty of folks around in this room, I think, that have that experience and could probably point you in the right direction about how to organize. If you're in a union and your union has not been doing very much over the last few years and has lost that organizing muscle, I think, again, in the spirit of May Day and May Day 2028, now is the time, especially if there's a contract coming up in a year or in a few months. If you haven't done a practice picket or an informational picket or worn buttons in solidarity with the bargaining team that's going to go in there, like, this is the time. And I know that there's like a lot of internal union struggles. I come from a troublemaking background, challenging my union leadership and winning elections. But I think that I think this is the time to take that next step forward. So if you're not in a union, time again to a union. If you're in a union, time to revive your union so that it's an organizing union and a fighting union. And just keep pushing the envelope that way. If you're currently retired, now is a time to reach out to movements and protests and unions that need your support concretely. Whether that's standing on the line with them, or if you've got a few bucks to give towards their hardship funds or solidarity, bring in some food and coffee. Like, I think we all have a role to play. And I think it's really important for us to be creative in this moment. And I don't think May Day, by no means should anyone leave this by saying the thinking that May Day 2020 is going to solve things. I think it's we've fallen so far behind as a left, as a labor movement in this country, that I think this is more of a spark. And that's why this year's May Day is important. Next year's May Day, and in 2028, we'll see how far we can go in terms of organizing it. But we just haven't tried stuff in this country. And so I can't tell you what the barometer of success is going to be for that, because we haven't ever tried anything that actually brings us together in this way. So now is the time to try stuff.
So what we're going to be doing is continuing what I said in answer to the question from the back of the room there, which is continuing to figure out, of all the things that we can fight against, which are the ones that are actually going to resonate with people and move us forward. And we've also been working and are going to continue working to, as part of our culture and our organization, anything you do, well, you can always choose any number of a bazillion things to do, and you can also do it in any number of different ways. So what we try to do is choose the right things to do, the things that are going to move us and workers and the working class forward. And we're always asking ourselves, how can we do this in a way that doesn't just do the thing? We don't just pass the bill. We're going to pass the bill. How can we pass the bill in a way that's also building the movement, so that whether our effort to pass the bill or not is successful or not, we're stronger after the fight to pass the bill than we were before? So that question is constantly on our minds. We actually have organizational structures to ask that question to make sure that we don't forget to ask it. So I would say that's what we're doing in our organization and will continue to do as we go forward through all of this. What can you do? You can take one of our Organizing for Power classes, which is an international awesome class. A bunch of folks in the room have done it with us. Unfortunately, it just finished, so it'll be a year before it happens again, but it's an amazing class. Anyone, we welcome all kinds of folks to do that with us. And I also want to say, make a new friend that has a different opinion than you about all this stuff. And find out what really moves them and why they see X, Y, or Z differently than you do. That's going to be really important.
I think for the nurses, there's a lot that we can be doing. And I think it's just to try to put my words together concisely is most nurses at Maine Med, not all of us obviously, are white women who should come together and make the struggles of today not about us. And we should bear witness to what's going on and be very loudly opposed to it. And I think we've done a pretty good job as soon as Trump's executive order to allow ICE to come into hospitals. Like, we were loud about that. And we were like, what's the plan? What do we do if and when this happens? And I think just like as white women, cis white women, be upset about what's going on, but like not put the spotlight on us and advocate for this very large population of asylum seekers that come through our doors every day. And then I think the other thing we can do is strike in December when our contract expires. I think building solidarity as workers, and then within our community, and we build solidarity in our community by sticking up for our community. And things that I think everyone else can do to kind of build that community solidarity. I think if you are a worker interested in organizing and have started some of the groundwork, there's a lot of resources you can reach out to, like Cynthia was saying. I love the AFL-CIO. Sarah Bigney McCabe is one of my favorite people in the world and will help anyone organize and talk so much slavery. Yeah. And also like a little smaller thing on Wednesdays, wear red in solidarity with federal workers whose collective bargaining rights have been revoked.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. A final round of applause for our speakers. Oh, yeah. Solidarity. All right.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.